The topic before us now, geoeconomics and energy security. It's time to talk about the complicated meeting point of geography and geology when it comes to hydrocarbons. This is an area full of questions about political and economic boundaries, as well as technological ones. We have two superb speakers. First, Wulf Bernotat, who is the chairman of the board and CEO of E.ON AG, a position he's held since 2003. He came to E.ON through the VEBA company in the merger. He started with that company in 1996. Before that, he had a long and distinguished career with Shell in Europe. He's a lawyer by training. He was educated at Göttingen, and he's a legendary business leader in his field. Together with him, Joe Stanislaw will be presenting. Joe has joined us from Boston, Massachusetts. He's an old friend of mine and happens to be one of the world's leading energy gurus, best known as a co-founder of the Cambridge Energy Research Associates back in the early 1980s. For a long time, he was president and CEO of that company. Since 2006, he's run his own small energy consulting group based out of Boston. He's also a senior advisor with Deloitte & Touche. He's the co-author of a prize-winning book on challenges of globalization entitled The Commanding Heights, which I'm sure all of you know. He was educated at Harvard, Cambridge, and Edinburgh. We're first going to turn to Mr. Bernotat and then to Joe Stanislaw. Sir.
Mark, thank you very much for your kind introduction and also for leaving a bit of time for Joe and myself as well for our presentation. I'm actually very glad and honored to be here today, that you've invited me to this very distinguished seminar. And I think the organizers were a bit concerned yesterday or the day before when it was published that I will retire. I'm not retiring now. I will retire in a year's time, so there's sufficient time perhaps even to return to this event next year. Ladies and gentlemen, the current economic crisis is a shocking demonstration of what happens when risks are dealt with carelessly and when they are not managed properly. All of us feel the enormous social costs and of these misguided developments. And however, there are also great risks involved in energy supply. And let us therefore start by talking about this and taking a look at the geopolitical environment. We depend on energy commodities from all over the world, and the world has not become any safer even after the collapse of the Soviet power bloc, although this is what some pundits had expected at the time. Geopolitics has returned. It had never really disappeared indeed, and energy is a particularly controversial hot-button issue. This chart is somewhat older. It was published by the German magazine Der Spiegel in summer 2006. That explains why, unfortunately, it is in German, but I think it highlights the important things. It illustrates the global scenario of conflicts in which energy plays a major role. Everywhere in the world, governments are pursuing their own national interests in energy supply, which sometimes even lead to armed conflict. The background to this increasing number of energy conflicts is the world's growing energy hunger. If you look at this chart, it shows the rapid increase in global energy demand since 1990 and extrapolates the trend until 2050. What is striking when you look at this chart is that although the contribution of renewable energy sources shown in reddish colors here will continue to grow, the demand for oil, gas and coal, shown in bluish colors, will also increase significantly. The world will continue to rely primarily on fossil fuels, while alternative energy sources are indeed and should gain ground. this will take time. Energy structures do not change in just a few years. The world currently consumes as much fossil energy in a single year as was stored over a period of nearly 1 million years. When seen over these long periods of the Earth's history, the use of fossil energy by humanity is only a very short interlude. And this short interlude is approaching its end. This applies above all to oil. Professor Schütt, who works at the Max Planck Institute of Coal Research in Germany and is vice chairman of the German Research Foundation, stated quite matter-of-factly, "Today we know for certain that reserves of oil, the most important resource for our civilization's energy supply, are finite." And he believes that there is no doubt that oil reserves will be depleted within a period of far less than 100 years. However, as the chart shows, coal and uranium reserves will last for quite a long time to come. But, and you all know that coal is problematic from a climate perspective, but nevertheless, newly industrialized countries like China and India rely on coal. Clean coal technologies like CCS, and that means carbon capture and storage, will therefore be crucial for global warming management. In view of abundant uranium reserves and resources, nuclear energy will play an important role worldwide because it is cost-effective and does not have any adverse impact on the climate. While non-conventional reserves and resources of gas will last for a long time to come, these resources are mainly found in the form of methane in seafloor deposits. From today's perspective, it is questionable whether it will ever be possible to produce this gas with practicable technologies and, more importantly, at competitive costs. In view of rising demand for a finite supply of fossil energy, it is no wonder, therefore, that energy distribution conflicts are increasing worldwide. And these geopolitical developments will become virulent for Europe, in particular with regards to gas. You will remember that in January of this year, the supply of Russian gas to Western Europe was cut down substantially for a period of 2 weeks. Eastern European countries were hit particularly hard, but the impact of the crisis was felt also in Central Europe. There can be no doubt that Russia's reputation as an important and reliable supply country suffered because of the gas crisis. But Russia remains an important trading partner for Europe, just as Europe is for Russia. There is no getting around Russia, the country which holds the largest reserves of natural gas in the world. In a number of countries, gas companies, and our own company, our subsidiary was one of them, were demonstrably able to maintain unrestricted deliveries to customers during the 2-week supply stoppage. These companies were able to rely on efficient, highly diversified and flexible procurement, a well-developed, closely interconnected pipeline system, and substantial storage facilities. In addition, gas companies were to a certain extent able to provide backup deliveries for other companies and customers in Eastern and Central Europe. Let me mention, for example, our backup deliveries to a number of countries in the East and Southeast of Europe. This was an example of practical emergency aid in the European gas industry, provided quickly and unbureaucratically. There can be no doubt that Europe must develop a joint approach to safeguarding gas supplies, but at the same time ensure market-based, flexible solutions. It is certainly advisable to define minimum requirements for basic security of supply. The common European understanding that will be achieved can then be implemented by each country in accordance with its own conditions. Furthermore, guidelines should be defined for crisis prevention and crisis management in the European context. However, it is not advisable to regulate security of supply down to the last detail and to try to plan the management of emergencies centrally in advance. Instead, it is essential to strengthen the ability of companies to act and adapt so that, if necessary, they can respond quickly, unbureaucratically, and in line with prevailing conditions. The European gas industry is confronted with the strategic challenge of guaranteeing Europe's gas supply in the long term. This will be a challenge because European gas demand will continue to grow while the EU's own gas production volume, mainly in the UK and the Netherlands, will decline. We expect that European gas consumption will have increased by more than 1/5 to between 650 and 700 billion cubic meters by 2020. The volumes currently under contract with Norway, Russia, Algeria and others, in particular Nigeria, Egypt and Qatar, are just sufficient to cover today's consumption. However, this also demonstrates that these long-term supply agreements are indeed the backbone of European gas supplies. E.ON has concluded supply agreements with Russia, for instance, which cover about 1/3 of our requirements, which extend until 2036. In view of the supply gap that would otherwise emerge in Europe, it is necessary to develop new gas supply sources, to reduce the transit risks by opening new delivery routes, to increase gas storage capacity, and to get more LNG into the market. Where should the gas come from for Europe? About 70% of the world's gas reserves are located in a belt around Europe that extends from Russia to the Caspian Sea via Iran and Qatar to North Africa. This means that compared with other regions in the world, Europe's geographical location is particularly favorable relative to the gas deposits. However, 70% of the gas consumption volumes needed in the EU in 2010 will be supplied by only 6 large companies. That is Gazprom, Statoil Hydro from Norway, Sonatrach Algeria, ExxonMobil, Shell, and Qatar Petroleum. And the top 3 of them are state-owned companies. And soon there will also be the state-owned gas companies in Iran and Nigeria on the European markets. European gas companies have to be able to negotiate with these big 6 at eye level in order to maintain favorable terms for the European consumers. It is therefore a mistake to believe that it would be possible to reduce gas prices by breaking up the European gas industry for the sake of competition. I think the opposition is true. We need strong gas companies in Europe. What we need instead are partnerships with producers, like the partnership between E.ON and Gazprom and between E.ON and Norway, that are designed to be reciprocal and last for a long time. E.ON and Gazprom have been partners for 35 years. Until the gas crisis in January, Gazprom had always been a reliable supplier, even during the most difficult periods of the Cold War. And in January, the Russian side also tried to deliver as much gas as possible to its European customers by using other delivery routes and by making available gas volumes that were not used for other purposes in Europe. At least this way, deliveries did not break down altogether. And E.ON, in turn, is Gazprom's biggest customer, or even Russia's biggest customer for long-term gas deliveries. We have a number of common projects, including the new North European gas pipeline system, Nord Stream, and I'll come back to this later. We have agreed with Gazprom that part of our 6.4% stake in Gazprom will be transformed into a stake in the Siberian Yuzhno-Russkoye gas field. The volumes of this gas field amounts to more than 600 billion cubic meters, which is 6 times the annual gas consumption in Germany. The negotiations on the necessary detailed agreements have reached a final phase, and the agreements will probably be signed in June this year. Several new routes for Russian and Caspian gas are currently being planned or under construction. Most probably not all of these projects will be implemented. South Stream, which is at an earlier planning stage, will focus on Russian gas supplies to southern Europe. TAP, a Trans-Adriatic pipeline, or IGI, the Greece-Italy gas pipeline, and Nabucco, a pipeline which will link up the Caspian area with Europe, will only rely on, or all rely on gas sources from that region. And at the moment, Gazprom is busy buying all those reserves and taking them into their own export system. E.ON is a partner in the Nord Stream project, a European project involving Gazprom and E.ON, as well as BASF in Germany and the Dutch company Gasunie, and potentially also Gaz de France in Paris. The European Commission and all other European institutions like Parliament and Council have classified this project as a strategic European project, and customers from a number of countries, and not only from the group of investors, have already booked capacity. Once this project has reached its ultimate capacity, we will transport 55 billion cubic meters of gas per year via this pipeline system to Europe. Since Europe needs at least 100 billion cubic meters of additional gas deliveries, it does not make any sense to play off the various pipelines projects against each other. Fears of the current transit countries that their pipelines might run dry are also completely unfounded. Another cornerstone of security of supply is gas storage capacity. Gas storage facilities are very useful not only to compensate for seasonal swings in consumption, but also to manage crises, as we have seen in January. Time and again, there have been discussions in Europe in recent years about governmental regulation of gas storage facilities. Is it really acceptable to leave this important precautionary instrument to private companies, has been the question. It's not only acceptable in my view, it's even necessary if you want investments to be made in expanding storage capacity. In Europe, we currently have a strong market that is working well and that enables companies to make profitable investments. Should gas storage facilities come under the control of governments, the commercial interest in their operation and, more importantly, in their expansion would immediately decline. A study conducted on behalf of the European Commission was designed to examine the establishment of strategic storage facilities managed by governments. It showed that such storage facilities would be 4 to 5 times more expensive than storage facilities for oil, and not surprisingly, this idea was dropped very quickly. Although we are under no governmental obligation to do so, we will invest billions of euros, as this chart shows, to considerably expand our storage capacity. As this chart shows, the share of LNG in the European gas supply will increase to approximately 1/4 by the year 2020. LNG is a catalyst for the globalization of the gas market. This explains the very tough competition in this segment. Unlike gas transported by pipeline, LNG carried on a ship can be sold and resold while it is still being transported, which is a common practice for oil. Currently, only 10% of global LNG supplies go to Europe. What we need is not only suppliers developing greater volumes, but also more LNG terminals in Europe. The global LNG market right now is very much price-driven. The lion's share will continue to flow into the Asian-Pacific region with its high-price markets that depend exclusively on LNG imports because of the country's geographical location. Import prices in this region are up to 30% higher than in Western Europe. The LNG volume in the Atlantic region will also increase significantly. Initially, however, these volumes will be mainly marketed in Southern Europe. North America and Northern and Western Europe are competing for the remaining LNG. But the United States needs less LNG than expected just a few years ago because the country has found more gas on its own territory and it has increased imports from Canada. Our medium-term goal is to have an annual volume of about 10 billion cubic meters of natural gas under contract in the form of LNG. In this field, our activities are focused on Northern and Western Africa as well as the Near East because we believe that this is where projects have greatest potential. On the other side of the business, we need capacity in so-called regas terminals. All these terminals, the cargo vessels unload and the liquefied natural gas and the LNG is then regasified and fed into the onshore pipeline system. Last year we became a partner in the Rotterdam LNG terminal called GATE, and starting from 2011, when the terminal is scheduled to be completed, our company will have booked annual capacity of 3 billion cubic meters of gas at this terminal. And in addition, there are various established or planned LNG terminals in Europe in which we either own a stake or have made firm capacity bookings. In summary, there are three priorities in our gas strategy designed to secure the supply of our customers in Europe in the long term. First, we will continue to diversify our gas supply by increasing the share of equity gas. Our long-term target is a share of 20%. Second, we will consolidate our cooperation with producers in order to conclude long-term agreements on competitive terms. This way, we will also give the necessary incentives to producing countries to increase their production volumes. And third, in the next years, we will invest billions in the expansion of infrastructure, including the Nord Stream pipeline system and a number of LNG terminals. With this strategy, we will expand our gas business, and at the same time, we will help secure European gas supplies. To this end, we need political settings that will give us the scope we need to be able to take the entrepreneurial risks. Or in other words, small is beautiful as a guiding principle for energy and competition policies is not in the long-term interest of the European consumer. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
We're going to turn to Joseph Stanislaw.
Can we put the lights up, please, in the audience? Thank you very much. Thank you, Mark, for the introduction. I'm Joe Stanislaw. My presentation will be a little bit different. I'll have no numbers. I apologize, or maybe I don't apologize, but no numbers. Before I do that, though, I want to thank Saint-Gobain for having me here. It's the first time I've been here, and it really is very exciting to be here. I want to say that I did own a company that I founded to put on major events around the world for 25 years. Some events with 2,000 or 3,000 people for 4 or 5 days. And you students do as good a job, if not better a job, I've ever seen. I really congratulate you. It really is fantastic. It's overwhelming how well you do. So thank you very much. I violated a basic rule of public speaking today because I came this morning to hear the sessions. And they were absolutely fantastic, but it was very scary. The quality of the presentations was really, really terrific. But you, the audience, were kind of awesome in the sense of the questions you asked. I couldn't believe how articulate your questions were. I'm not sure if you wrote them out 3 weeks before and presented them, but they were really quite powerful questions. I wonder if there's a rule that only students can ask questions, because most of these students asking questions, which really impressed me, actually, that you're asking all of these questions so in such a sophisticated manner. But my talk is going to be very James Joycean, if you know who James Joyce is or was, an Irish writer who won the Nobel Prize, very famous author. He wrote in a way it was called a random walk. He just moseyed around and made you think through where he wanted to go and kind of draw your own conclusions from it. I'm going to kind of do the same thing with you. I will give you some conclusions up front. Conclusions are very simple: the challenge of change, the opportunity of a lifetime, the word shape, a simple word called shape, and a term called mutual interdependence. We usually hear mutual dependence. I mean mutual interdependence, something that we have not practiced. I even wrote a book about globalization, and we talked about dependence. It's mutual interdependence. We should rewrite the book. I also want to change the topic in a sense. It should be geoeconomics, energy security, and climate change. You cannot talk about energy security without saying climate change. It is one of the most important issues in the world today, and energy is central to its solution. And whether you believe it or not, there are a lot of naysayers out there now doubting the wisdom of our scientists. Doesn't matter. We need to do all the things we would do to address climate change, to address energy security, and to address economic growth. The reality is the conventional wisdom has been wrong for a decade. The conventional wisdom said by addressing climate change and energy security, we will reduce economic growth. That's absolutely wrong. The real issue is if we do not address climate change and energy security together, we will limit economic growth. And I think the financial crisis and the economic crisis we're facing has given us the opportunity of a lifetime to really say now we can address it, because the system is broken all over the place. And this is an opportunity to address it. Mark mentioned Obama. He and I obviously probably share the same sympathies. Obama met this week in Congress with the top 25 or 35 legislators working on energy legislation and climate change for 2 or 3 hours in a private meeting. And he said to them, energy policy and climate change is his top priority. It's more important than health care. That's very important to keep in mind. He is determined to drive this. He's determined. And he said to these legislatures, you were elected to lead. Now is the time to lead. And he's trying to drive this. And I think it's an important challenge that I think will be achieved as we go forward. Now, I put those two together. I also want to say that the whole title of the symposium could not fit energy any better. Revival of political and economic boundaries. In fact, I think the title is probably wrong. The boundaries never went away in the world of energy. The political boundaries never went away. We've been living with them ever since the beginning of mankind, and we're still living with them. Yes, we know about Russia and Ukraine this past winter. We know about effective nationalization of resources in Russia over the past several years. Bolivia, Venezuela have nationalized. It's rampant. But guess what? A German company tried to buy a Spanish company in a place called the EU. They ran into nationalism, I think. A Chinese company tried to buy an American company. That was stopped dead in its tracks. It's rampant. It's just not in the producing countries. You know, it's feeling that this is here before the financial crisis. It was a danger we were facing. And now is the time to think about the world differently. I'm going to stop there and move on to give you some facts. Have you ever heard about the 2, 5, 25, 25 principle? Anyone in the room? It's a very simple principle that the world can no longer tolerate having this principle. The principle is this. The United States has 2% of the world's resources. We have 5% of the world's population. We use 25% of everything. We produce 25% of everything, including CO2 and all greenhouse gases. We're very, very productive. We cannot tolerate that principle any longer. I created a term called the Saudi, Caspian, Siberian, Canadian corridor. That's the corridor on which the world's resources lie. Now, I'm going to shake you up because I know you're very Germanic here. The original map we all look at in the world has, in my right hand, the Western Hemisphere, and my left hand, the Eastern Hemisphere. That's because a German cartographer wanted Germany to be the center of the world, which isn't that map, by the way. If you reverse that and put the Western Hemisphere now in my left hand and the Eastern Hemisphere in the right hand, that corridor from Saudi Arabia through the Caspian, through Siberia to Canada contains the overwhelming majority of the world's energy resources and mineral resources. That corridor. And I include in that wind, water resources, yes, oil, gas, coal, uranium, and a lot of precious metals, but also water resources, solar potential, wind potential, and most importantly, that corridor contains most of the people being educated in the world today in petroleum engineering and geology and petroleum sciences. This morning in one session, someone over here asked a question, the man from ABB, about corporate culture, having different nationalities as corporate leaders. If you're in the oil and gas business today, where do you find your talent? There are 2,000 kids being trained in Western Europe, in North America, in petroleum engineering sciences. Well, places. They aren't all Western Europeans and North Americans. There's one institute in Moscow alone that has 2,000 each year in entering class. 8,000. And they have 5 of those institutes. There's one in Azerbaijan. We are not training the kids, basically. Keep that corridor in mind. 80% of the world's hydrocarbons, oil and gas, are held in countries where most of the companies we might represent have no access to. Now, depends how you define that, but it's right around 80%. Next comment is very strong is there's a changing industrial structure taking place in the world. I call it, it's an issue of market and might. Chinese and Indian oil companies and gas companies can do things in the world today that a German company can't do, a U.S. company can't do. What do I mean? A Chinese company wants to do something in Nigeria. A week before the Chinese company goes there, the premier goes and gets $5 billion of foreign aid. The next week, the oil company goes and gets a lease. That doesn't happen with our companies. And maybe it used to, but it doesn't. There's a changing balance of power in the world. How can China do it or India? They have market. The resources that they need is a market for those resources. They have financial might. A lot of dollars to do a lot of things. This world has changed dramatically on us as we stand here. And one comment, which is kind of factual, but Wulf showed it better in this picture. Realize when I started in this business just a few years ago, 1975, there was no recorded data on Chinese oil demand. Can you believe that? I was co-author of one of the world's first world studies on supply demand. We made up Chinese data. I mean that. It was based on CIA estimates of how many tanks, military aircraft, and military vehicles there were. There was no private cars. There was no data. They are now the second largest user of oil in 30 years. That's pretty dramatic stuff. If you look at Wulf's picture up there, by 2030, world energy consumption will double. Chinese and Indian energy consumption, including oil and gas, will double, if not triple. And guess what they're planning on? 70% of that resource will be imported. Well, guess what? Europe's importing more. The U.S. is importing more. Play with your imagination a bit. There ain't enough imports. There ain't enough exports. Pardon my bad English. It's a challenge. Now I'm going to stop and ask a question. Who in this room is under 30? No, be honest. There's really a lot of young people in the room. How many are over 50? Okay, how about the rest are between the two? This is an unusual audience for the university, obviously. I asked the question because I highlighted human capital in my Saudi, Caspian, Siberian, and Canadian corridor. The oil and gas industry is aging fast. The average age is in its mid to late 40s. Until a year ago, they're all hoping to retire by 55. Unfortunately, the financial crisis may mean we have more human capital longer. I regret for those people. But the human capital is an issue. If you're in the nuclear industry, go to EDF of France and ask how many people built a recent nuclear power plant in EDF, and they will say none, although a few are doing it now in Finland. But most people have retired in the industry. Who has seen Al Gore's movie, Inconvenient Truth? I think it should be a requirement. Everyone in the university sees this movie. Whether you believe it or not, I think everyone should see the movie because it's influenced a whole universe of people out there that one should be seeing this movie. Who knows where the largest oil well was found in North America in the 1970s? Largest oil well in North America in the 1970s. It's a trick question. No one knows? Detroit, Michigan. Okay? How do I get that? There's no oil and gas. There's some gas there, but no oil. Detroit, because the only time we had energy policy in the United States was when Nixon, Ford, and Carter imposed CAFE standards, fuel economy mileage standards. As a result of that little thing, we reduced our oil consumption curve, just dropped it by about 3 million barrels a day from fuel economy improvements in a 6-year period. That's profound. That's the biggest any oil well was actually found out there. That's big. That's not real supply. That's why I also want to change the definition of energy. It's just not what we supply. It's what we use, the service we want from it, and change the business model of what we're trying to provide to people. It's not raw energy. We're trying to provide light and heat and sometimes no energy. If you can do without it, you don't need it, and that's a big saving. That's an oil well found in the system. Very important. Who has changed their light bulbs in their house to the compact fluorescent? Well, I'm disappointed. I told everybody in Switzerland I've done that, basically. Do you realize in America, if every single household replaces one light bulb with a compact fluorescent, that's as much CO2 removed from the U.S. production of CO2 as 60 million cars. It's true. We have 130 million households. This is big. This is big. Individuals can do a lot here on addressing this issue as we look at it. I coined a term called the energy of geopolitics. Whatever you think about energy, it is central to everything we do in the world. Every single international issue in the world today has energy at its center. Poverty reduction. Can't do without energy. Clean water. You can't do without energy. Sanitation. You can't do without energy. Economic growth. However you value economic growth, you can't do without energy. Climate change, environment, health care. I was with the foreign minister of Nigeria recently. His daughter is at Harvard Medical School. We live in Boston. He said to his daughter, who's just about to finish, she's a surgeon. Are you going to come back to Nigeria? She said, Dad, I can't. And he loves his daughter like we all love our daughters. So it disappointed him. He said, why not? She said, I'm a surgeon. I cannot practice in Nigeria because there's no electricity that's reliable for me during my operations. This is serious stuff. And by the way, oil and gas, I agree entirely with Wulf. He's right. The bridge to the future is oil, gas, and coal. I may disagree with how much or little in the future, but that's the bridge to the future. Because all of you in the room, who wears perfume in this room? Men or women or cologne? Oh, come on, everyone wears some cologne, don't they? Or perfume. That's oil and gas, by the way. Do you know that? Who uses hand cream? That's oil and gas. Did you know that? Most of the clothes you wear have some oil and gas in them. So we may want to be green. I am very green. It takes a while to get there. We have to transform things to get to the future for us. Now, there are two energy worlds we're living with right now. I'm going to call it the legacy world. Pardon me, Wulf. Oil, gas, and coal. You're now facing massive demand destruction in this world. Oil demand is now down 3 million barrels a day, we think, on an 18-month basis. That is huge, by the way. Last time this sort of thing happened, it was in the early 80s. It took us 10 years to get back to 1980 oil demand rate levels before the destruction happened. Now, of all this demand that's been lost, a lot of it's not going to come back. It's been destroyed. And also, if you're in the oil and gas business, if you hear my words right, you're facing massive resource nationalism. It's a tough game. There's another energy world. It's small right now. I'm on the board of a few companies in this world. It's called the green industry. You know, green was chic. It was fashionable. It became a necessity. Now it's an economic opportunity, the green technologies. Well, they're suffering too. They're the biggest losers in the financial crisis. If you're a young technology company now, you can't get access to loans or credit. It's a killer for them. But the market's going to grow just as the market's going to grow for oil and gas in the future. Financial crisis or financial crisis, this industry is going to just keep growing. There's nothing to stop it unless we stop having kids. Now think about that one too along the way. We have in the new sector technology entrepreneurs. These are crazy people. I use that terminology with respect. These are technology entrepreneurs who think their technology will solve the problem. And they're driven by their idea. And there are thousands of them. And they're now being encouraged by governments. Because the fact of the energy market is, the energy market has always been a policy-driven market. Always been a policy-driven market. And even more so now, it's just changing who gets the benefit of the policy. Now, if you're in the United States right now, and you're in the oil and gas business, Obama has made it clear to people, oil and gas, you're second-class citizens. I mean, seriously. The only thing you hear about oil and gas is we're going to tax you more. And for the oil and gas industry to survive in America, they have to come to terms with that and say we're going to be part of the solution. And we're going to be reducing our CO2 emissions right now as well from gas and from oil so we can survive in the future. And they will, too. That's the game that's going on out there. It's changing dramatically. Now, no, I just talked about green. Let's move a little bit more to some more facts or realities, as I may want to call them. But some of those are very simple. I disagree with the numbers. I don't disagree. We'll show some numbers on how long oil may last at current consumption rates. I wrote 5 years ago, we'll see peak oil demand before we see peak oil supply. Keep that in the back of your heads. Why? The last permanent home solely that belonged to oil was transportation. Guess what's just been lost? The transportation market. It's going hybrid diesel. It's going hybrid electric. It's going electric. We'll still have oil, no question. We'll still have ethanol. I'm not a buyer of the ethanol programs at all. But we'll have alternative biofuels coming in from different products, not the corn-based ethanols and other things. Oil lost its last domain. Oil demand before peak oil supply. Keep that in mind. The oil end game has started. It's going to take a generation for the end game to be realized in a sense. It's not going away completely because it's a very valuable chemical as well. But the end game has actually started. And there's a transformation going on before us. It started a couple of years ago. It's now gained momentum. Yes, oil and gas and coal are the bridge to the future. The future is don't use energy. Change what services you need. Put efficiency in place and the alternatives. That's where we're going. How long that bridge is depends upon policy. And we're about to see a transformation in policies in countries around the world. Now, an important point, Wulf was talking about gas supply from Russia. Gas demand that's requiring that supply. These twin forces of climate change and energy security provoke and antagonize political and economic boundaries. What do I mean by that? If you're a consuming country in Europe, you say, more natural gas for now, more efficiency, alternative fuels, just go down the list, the 20-20-20 program of Europe, all these things. It basically says to a supplier, I'm the consumer now, I want more efficiency, I want to use less, I want to get off of hydrocarbons, but I need to get over this bridge. It happens to be hydrocarbon-based. So I go over here this side of the room, and I'm the producer now. And I'm saying, I got a lot of oil and gas, but you just told me you want me for the next 10 or 15 years, and then goodbye. Then goodbye. I got to look at this world differently, too. I only have oil and gas, by the way. Even now, if you look at Russia, all Russia has is oil and gas. You have no other economy in Russia. All I got is oil and gas. And these guys are telling me they don't want me in 20 years' time or 30 years' time. How do I play this game? What I've just described to you is massive, massive misunderstanding in a marketplace. Europe has got to do things differently, which Wulf outlined. which I agree with, liberalization of markets, connecting pipelines, so that gas could have gone to southeastern Europe. We can't go there. And the producers have to change what they're doing, too. We have to get them together in a different way. And we're not addressing that right now. We're letting the rivalries and the boundaries interfere with where the world can go, because people are scared to say what really should be said in a situation. Russia's only market for natural gas, and they can bluster all they want, is Europe. And the European market is 90% of Russia's gas revenues, because it's free inside Russia virtually. So if they lose Europe, they're in trouble. And that's all their economy has. So we need to get some understanding going here. And on that issue of producer-consumer, there was an old phrase, I forget who said it, Mark probably knows better than I, that when goods don't cross boundaries, tanks will. And we saw that already. I regret I'm saying that. We saw it already, and it could happen again. And I'm not just thinking about Russia and Europe. Think about Chinese desire for energy. You know, the South China Seas are kind of dangerous places right now. There was a little incident a few weeks ago, if you remember. This is all very serious stuff. Now, I don't mean to end the pessimistic, and I'm not going to end in a pessimistic notion. I'm going to say to you, finally, the rules of the game are about to change. There was a question asked this morning about carbon. A government's job, I wrote this in my book, is to be the referee and to help define the rules of the game that's being played. That's the market. Governments have always interfered in markets, always had regulations and changed the rules. The rules have to be changed. And the government has to regulate those and referee those. What do I mean? Simply put, yes, we have to price carbon. However we do it, we have to price it. Yes, we have to price water. Do you know how much water it takes to produce energy? A lot. I mean, in California, it's about 20%, 25% of their power demands required for water and water for power. These are big numbers. The oil sands of Canada, oil shales, conventional oil production needs water. Water is one of the most constrained resources in the world today. We have to price water on a real market basis as we go forward. And that's about to happen. I'm not saying this year, but it has to happen, and it will happen because everyone knows it has to happen. Or we face a future we don't really want to face. So those games are changing. So the conclusion, the challenge of change, the opportunity of a lifetime, there will be more money spent in the energy sector in the next 50 years, in a broader sense, than probably has been invested in the history of mankind. I'm not making that number up. We're going to have a complete transformation of our system in a 50-year period. We have to go from mutual misunderstanding, which I say is massive in the world today, not because of the financial crisis, for other reasons, to mutual interdependence. And that means, simply put, these new technologies will be more local. We're going to produce more locally, which we can. And if you know the name Fritz Schumacher, who wrote the book Small is Beautiful, he was right but too early. Local means global. He was a globalist. But it starts with local things, and then you become interdependent. And finally, my final conclusion, the word shape. Shape is a word in the English language, anyhow, that can be a verb and a noun. And I like the verb rather than the noun. Because the noun says, someone else will determine the shape of your future. And the verb says, I will shape my future. And finally, on that comment, this is the first time in the history of humanity that every action that every one of you take individually can make a difference to climate change, energy security, and how the world evolves. Think about that light bulb. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joe. That was both Joycean and thought-provoking. We're running a little late by design. We have time for a few questions, so I'll recognize folks from the audience. You know the rules. Identify yourselves and direct the questions. Sir, right here.
Hi, my name is Nick Spall. I'm from South Africa. My question relates to, as a result of the financial crisis, is it true that it's become more of a luxury for first world governments to deny kind of developing countries trying to buy strategic assets? And if this is the case, will there be a backlash if these developing countries own these strategic assets after the financial crisis?
Well, if I understand it, I have to go here. Am I on? Can you hear me? I can't hear me. Maybe it's better I don't. There's no question that the food crisis, number one, combined with the financial crisis, number two, has put a lot of strain on a lot of countries. Those who have more wealth are in situations having less food, for example, or less food production capabilities. And there have been more countries in their sovereign wealth funds seeking areas to buy agricultural land for food production for their countries. I don't think that's a result of the financial crisis. I think it's a result of the world resource problem and the world population problem and land patterns of land usage. And I think it's inevitable that trend will continue in terms of aspiration, will succeed in terms of acquisition of lands for food production to be sent back to where the country happens to be is questionable. But China has been involved in it. Saudi Arabia is discussing it. Other countries are discussing it. And likely locations have been any place from Nigeria to Brazil to Ukraine for discussions.
Wolf, do you want to add to that?
No, that's fine.
Sir.
Hello, my name is Ali Ahmed, and I'm from the last sector of your corridor, Canada. And my question is about the Alberta oil sands. A few years ago, when the oil prices were really high, there was a huge boom in Alberta with investments and jobs taking place over there. That has stopped since the oil prices dropped. Now there's empty oil sands. A lot of projects have been halted. My question is, what do you see as the future of the oil sands in particular, but similar areas around the world in the near future, considering the material you mentioned about oil as a bridge to the future? Thank you.
I'm going to answer this from somebody I know I'm going to in about 3 weeks. I'm going to be a guest of your environmental minister, who's your deputy prime minister, Mr. Prentice, out in Alberta with 11 provincial environmental ministers to discuss this exact issue. 30 of us are going to be there. The Alberta oil sands face a real challenge. They have metals problems in lakes. They have cancer problems in humans. Huge user of water resources. Makes this ugly footprint that we see from satellites, which no one ever see otherwise, but it makes an impression. Yes, the financial crisis has hit it hard. The collapse in oil demand more so, actually, in the financial crisis. But the real issue is it's political. There was a National Geographic, if you know what the National Geographic is, that came out, I think, in January or February, with the oil sands on the cover, that showed that these footprints, which we would never see otherwise, water usage, which doesn't make any difference at all because no one's going to import that water down to the United States, but it's on top of mind in the United States right now environmentally. Congressman Waxman, who's in charge of the main House Committee with respect to energy and finance, is anti-oil sands. If you look at the administration in terms of their policy, the policy is environment, climate change, then energy security. So it doesn't rank at all in the right dimension for the administration's point of view. There's even a group of people in Congress saying, let's prohibit the importation of oil sands oil to the United States. It faces a real challenge. The economics aren't that bad, actually, even at lower prices. It's the challenge of politics and environment and climate change and CO2. And I put into context, the CO2 produced by the oil sands is a fraction, about that much, of the CO2 produced by U.S. coal production and coal use. But it's just a big visual and symbolic thing that has captured the attention of policymakers and environmentalists in the United States. It has a rough future. It's a challenge.
Next question down here. Yeah. Could you bring the microphone down? The young lady first.
Hello, I'm Lisa Herzog from Germany. I'm a philosopher, and philosophers wonder a lot about human nature, and that may seem very abstract and far away from the world of energy business. But actually, in your predictions, it plays a huge role because you have to predict whether humans are going to change their behavior. And there is a huge question whether it's realistic or far too optimistic to think that people might reduce their energy consumption voluntarily, or whether that could only be done by raising prices. And I would like to connect this to a debate that has taken place in the 18th century about the corn laws. And corn was at that time what energy is today. It was the scarce resource where there were regular problems. And Adam Smith has this theory that corn traders have a good role because they raise the price and therefore people consume less, and that makes corn last until the next harvest comes. And so I was wondering whether that's basically why you think there's so much money to be earned in the energy market, and if so, what's the next harvest? Thank you.
Well, that was a very interesting question. But I think the underlying theme you were just mentioning is that you need an incentive to consume less. And that goes normally via the price. In a sense, you can argue, and I know what I'm saying because I was attacked for that in the German press some time ago, that you can argue that energy is still too cheap. And you probably need the incentive coming from higher energy prices that people really start changing their behavior and reduce their own consumption. I nevertheless believe that there is now sufficient understanding that even with current price levels, there's sufficient reason, even coming from the climate change aspect, that people are starting gradually to change their behavior. That gives me hope that indeed we will see that happening. And the greatest hope, actually, Joe, I place on the US in that respect, because I can't think of any country that is wasting so much energy as your country does. And therefore, the potential is colossal. I just would like to mention one example. When you go to a hotel in the US, normally you find all the lights are on and the TV as well. And then you leave the room and try to find a main switch, you can't find it. So normally you have to go from bulb to bulb and switch it off, and nobody does it. So therefore, I mean, you go out for dinner and the lights are staying on. Very simple thing. You can change it if you only want. So this is just a very small example, but there's huge potential. Not only in the US, by the way.
No, I think huge potential every place, but we have the biggest potential, no question of that. Your point is exactly right. I didn't get into it. But if you ask me from the US point of view, it cannot be done with price alone. You have to regulate it. You cannot buy an SUV that gets less than 30 miles a gallon. If you want an SUV, it's got to get 30 miles a gallon. If they regulate that as well as put the price up as well. If you don't do both in the United States, it will not change behavior. It's too embedded. Should sort of rule against it. So the market, with government regulations, let's say the rules of the game, change the rules, and it will respond. I think you may well see a gasoline tax price rise come to the United States.
We've got time for one last question. Sir.
I'm Shmulik from Israel, and I can't compete with such brilliant questions. Mine is much simpler. It's actually to you both. If you look at countries, be it Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and even much major powers like Russia and China, questions of democratization, like pure politics, really connect with questions of energy. That is, for example, if the U.S. wants to pressure Egypt for further democratization, perhaps issues of oil supply and gas supply, that even Egypt as a minor actor has some role into this energy has impact on pure politics in that respect as well. So basically my question is, if you predict major trends and shifts in energy supplies and development of new energy sources, so how will this affect democratization trends, et cetera, et cetera?
Well, it's also it's an interesting subject you're addressing, because we have seen conflicts that have their root cause probably in energy policies and securing supplies long term. And you've got different standards in the world. You have let's say the so-called Western world, which is trying to transport its values also into other countries and try to bring their concept of democracy to those countries. You can question whether that's the right approach, but it is happening. And you've got other countries like China that are bringing money into such countries but not democracy, and securing supplies in return. Take Iran, where China is investing huge amounts of money, and Western companies like ourselves are blocked effectively by US policies to invest. So if that continues, we will see that these interesting gas reserves in Iran, for instance, will probably move eastwards rather than westwards. Again, you can say, is it right or wrong? Because you're addressing a moralish aspect in a sense. But the question comes, to what extent should Realpolitik, as we call it in Germany, real policy based on, let's say, not sort of high standards, but based on practical interests in business, should they prevail or not? So it's a very political issue, and so far the so-called Western community has adopted to pursue high standards, high moral standards, and that sort of slips into the business practices. Whether the energy policy should be used to sort of support democratic processes, I have my doubts, quite frankly. We would probably expect too much.
I'm going to answer it briefly but very differently. I agree with everything Wulf has said. I'm going to answer it differently. I'm on the board of a company called Good Energies, Inc. It's basically a solar company. And we've created a foundation. And we address the democracy issue differently, which is if you're in the Sudan, in the village, you get medicine from the world community for your children who child is about to die. You can't use the medicine. There's no refrigeration. You can't think about democracy. So what we've done is we've given them solar refrigerators so they can have their medicine, so the child may survive, and then they may well have the luxury to think about challenging the central government to think about democracy. Our view is do it from the bottom, not from the top. You can't impose it by a Bush policy that we're going to democratize Saudi Arabia. It's not going to happen. It's through education, it's generational, and it's through time. We're doing another project in Ethiopia. There's a huge canyon where women walk 7 hours a day down the bottom to get water and bring it up. They can't think about democracy. We help create a mini industry where they have solar water pumps. And now you have a business, and they can think about democracy. That's how you do it.
Well, thank you both for an excellent presentation. If you're an American out there, change your light bulbs. Please join me in thanking both speakers.